here at MCC New York, we run a shelter for homeless LGBTI youth called Sylvia's Place, named after Sylvia Rivera, who was the mother of the queer rights movement in the United States. And we run an overnight emergency shelter in the first floor of our church. We say emergency because we take kids directly off the street, and then we try to keep them no longer than 90 days, although sometimes we do keep them longer. And during that time, we try to get them into a more stable housing situation, back in school or at a job, care of a doctor, in the care of a mental health professional if they need that, connected to other kinds of social services that they're entitled to here in the city. Any night, we can house as many as 17 youth. They can't be older than 23 because at that point, according to the law, they graduate into adulthood. They have to go to an adult shelter. We give them a safe night's sleep. They have a folding cot that they're responsible for. They have a bin where they put their clothing and personal supplies. They get to shower and they get supper and breakfast. We have a full-time professional social worker on staff. We have a psychiatric nurse on staff. We have a drop-in counselor. We have a person who runs our HIV outreach. 3 times a week, what we call a medical van. It's a big bus that's like a doctor on wheels comes by so that they can get medical services. And if they're transgender, we have a support group for them every Saturday, and we also have something called Reverend Pat's Finishing School, where they can go to learn better ways to transition to society, get a job, that kind of thing. We have other kinds of support groups for non-trans kids, like art groups, dance groups, and HIV positive groups. And once a month they have a house meeting where they discuss what's going on in the community and go over the rules and that kind of thing. So it's it's kind of like a group program.
Okay. It seems like you're doing a lot of things there.
Yeah.
Is it the case for all the country, or is it your case, your organization, what you're doing is it singular, or there are more initiatives like this?
There are scattered initiatives throughout the country, but not an overwhelming number. On any given night in New York City, there could be as many as 30,000 kids homeless in the city, and about 40% of them will identify as LGBTI4Q. So it's a huge number here. They're doing very excellent work in San Francisco, and I think they're doing some work in Washington State, so a few places around the country. And I know that they've opened a shelter in Jamaica called Dwayne's House in honor of the young kid who was murdered there. And they're trying to open a shelter in Seoul, Korea. And there's a shelter in San Jose, Costa Rica that isn't primarily for kids but takes homeless LGBT youth.
Okay. How did it become an issue for you? I mean that in Romania we never even had a mapping of the situation of LGBT homeless people. How did it become an issue that is important for organizations and for maybe government initiatives as well?
Right. Well,
how did it start in a way?
Because MCC originated as the church serving the LGBTI community, a lot of people come here for services. We had a food pantry, a rather major food pantry. We serve about 5,000 people every month, men, women, and children, some kind of food assistance. So we were meeting and hearing about the living situations of many different people, among them queer youth. And so we didn't know what to do exactly. We didn't think our first floor was good enough to house kids. So when another organization lost their space, we actually took them in for 2 years for free until they could get on their feet again. And so we saw them running their program in our space. And then Sylvia Rivera, whom I mentioned earlier, came to work for us as the director of our food pantry. And she got very sick. She got liver cancer, and I was with her when she died, and she grabbed a hold of me and said, "Are you going to do it or not?" Meaning, was I going to continue to house queer children here on my own, queer youth? So I said that I would, and that was my commitment to do it. And so we started with volunteers. We applied for government funding and other kinds of grants and grew from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How do you do it practically? Because I know that I've spoken with somebody that works in an organization that works with homeless people in Bucharest, and they never ask about people's sexual orientation or gender identity. Is it that people just come to you because they know that you are open and they know they could find good services? Or is it that you made some steps, like not only specifically only you, but I mean in general, how do service providers or NGOs do to get to these people?
We're advertised as a homeless emergency shelter for LGBTI youth. So a kid who's homeless in the city knows that this is an option if they are queer to come here. And MCC is known as the church that is open to, but works primarily in the LGBTI community. So it's known, and when kids come here, if they're not queer and it's emergency that night, we'll take them that night, but then we place them someplace else the next day, because one of our goals is that this be safe space for LGBTI youth.
Okay. I read some articles on the internet on the situation of homeless youth in United States, and there it said that one of the causes that people get thrown out of their houses is religion. Is that true or not?
No, it's true. A lot of religious right people teach what they call tough love, that kids are not born this way, that they can change, that they can go to therapy and make a different choice. If they won't do that, that you should discipline them. In extreme cases, refuse to house and feed them, clothe them, take care of them until they change. So a lot of kids here have been thrown out. There are kids here who also have complex situations. So for example, if a kid is LGBTIQ, and their parents are objecting to that, and on top of that, they have a mental health issue, the parents may just, throw their hands up in the air, relinquish their responsibilities, and throw them out. So there are kids here with very complex situations, but among the factors are parents who are abdicating their responsibilities toward these kids.
Okay. Can you tell us if, in your opinion, things have improved in the last years, let's say, or is it getting worse when it comes to the situation of LGBT youth that are homeless?
I actually think it's a mixed answer. You could say it's getting better in the sense of more people paying attention to it, more government funding available, more political leaders concerned and wanting to support programs. But it's getting worse in the sense of more kids ending up on the street. As kids come out earlier and as the religious right pushes back harder, it becomes a more and more pressing and overwhelming situation in the United States. I don't think we're at the point yet where we can actually say that the numbers are decreasing. I think we will get there, but we're not there.
Okay. Um, would you have somehow of an advice maybe for service providers here in Romania? Because we have just a few service providers and they're mostly from NGOs that work with homeless people in general. The state doesn't really do too much. So I would be curious if you would have a starting advice, let's say, for them when it comes to working with LGBT youth.
Well, one thing I would suggest is that they come together and that they work together as a coalition, because running a shelter for kids is a lot of work, and it takes both a lot of goodwill and a lot of professional support, and it takes a lot of financial support. So I think that the more people can band together and work together, the better. I also think that it's important to identify positive, supportive professionals in the community who may not be on the shelter staff or may not be giving money to the shelter, but whom you can count on, like if you need a doctor or if you need a therapist or if you need a priest or whatever it is you might need. So I think the first step is some community gatherings and letting people discuss the problem and letting people brainstorm what is a good response in Bucharest or, in Romania overall, and what are the cultural conditions that we need to take into consideration, and also like identifying funders. As you say, if it's not like government funding that you can apply for, then you need to identify people in the community who are going to be willing to support it. If at some point you want to talk to the administrator at Sylvia's place about funding options, I can put you in touch with her, and I'm sure she'd be willing to help you.
We're getting to the end. I have just one more question concerning the relation of first of all of the children, of the youth that comes there with their parents, and if there is any legal issues when it comes to working with young people.
Yes, there are. If the child is 14 or younger, we're mandated to contact social services. So, and allow that child to go into foster care. So we've had to put some of our effort into working on the foster care system here and trying to make it safer for LGBTI youth. And I don't know what Romania's legal system is. Once a kid's over 14, then they can come into the shelter and not be mandated to be turned over to foster care. So that's one problem we have. We have in our congregation some volunteer attorneys who navigate some of the legal problems for us. And again, Bucharest, Romania probably has its own system that I know nothing about. But in your community, I'm sure there are some attorneys, gay attorneys, lesbian attorneys, who would be willing to sort of map that out for you and help you steer around what could be potential difficulties. Most of the time, if parents have thrown their children out, they're not going to be going after them, bothering you for taking care of them. So it's really just that age limit thing that comes into play sometimes.
Okay.
And then the other thing is a lot of these kids get into legal trouble. We have to help them with that.
Okay. For us, reading the statistics from the United States was really shocking because, as you told us before, and I've also read it on the internet, I think 40% of youth, homeless youth in the United States are LGBT, and I think that a high percentage of this 40% is also trans youth. Do you have any thoughts on this? I know that the religious reasons for their parents and other things like this push them to do this, but still the percentage is so big that I cannot believe it. It's very, very big.
Well, besides parents who are not supportive of their children, there's also the issue of schools and churches not really creating safe environments for these kids,
Mm-hmm.
and these kids pushed to the limits and like they would be better off on their own, which they're not. They're kids. They don't know how to take care of themselves, and a lot of times they end up being involved in sex work or being trafficked because they'll go for the first kind hand that reaches out to them. So it it's a huge and complex issue. One of the things we have to do here is have somebody check outside the shelter for guys who may be strolling up and down the street hoping to pick up a kid. I mean, word gets out that it's safe space for kids, and then that makes it fair game, quote, fair game for all the people who are abusing them as children. So I think, hand in hand with this goes the willingness to tackle school systems and to work for policies and programs in schools that make it safe for LGBTI kids and safe for them to explore their identity. I think, I don't know how the Romanian school system works, but, health classes where they can discuss their gender identity or sexual orientation and get true and accurate and helpful information. I think working on the religious establishment and, getting people to agree to the truth that the Bible doesn't condemn us, and even if they believe that, it doesn't say any place that they should throw their kids out or they should create situations that lead to their death or harm them in some way. So I mean, even for people who believe it's wrong to be LGBT, there's got to be more of a middle ground here. And so when I say it's a complex situation, I'm meaning there are all these levels on which we have to kind of deal and strategize.